Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for attending our June webinar. Today, the talk will be on puppy farming and our speaker is Chris Laurence. Just an introduction about Chris. So Chris has a huge amount of experience working in the veterinary and the animal welfare science sectors. He's received numerous awards for his service to animal welfare. So yeah, we're very lucky to have Chris speak with us again today. And I'll just give you a brief introduction into the Animal Welfare Foundation, or AWF, as we tend to call it. My name's Alina. I work in the grants and events space at AWF. And we are the British Veterinary Association's charity. So we're a science-led charity with a mission to keep animal welfare at the heart of the veterinary profession. And there's three main activities that we do in order to try and achieve that mission, ultimately to increase the knowledge of animal welfare and also increase the understanding of animal welfare within these professions. So one of the things we carry out is that we fund research into animal welfare issues. We also run an annual conference, which is called the Discussion Forum, and that's a platform where we discuss and debate animal welfare challenges, and we have lots of experts in the field, and it's a day that's purely dedicated to talking about animal welfare. We also do quite a lot in the education space, so ultimately that's to support the next generation of animal welfare advocates. And I'll just go through a little bit more about what we offer our students, because we try to involve students as much as possible. We run these talks, so this is more of a general webinar where anyone with an interest in animal welfare can attend. So we're trying to run these fairly regularly. We also do more talks sort of targeted at student groups. So often veterinary student groups will get in touch with us and we can host a talk at the university, or we can do an online talk specifically for the class. So if that's of interest to anyone, feel free to get in touch. We also have a student grant scheme. So for students in veterinary science or a related degree that need to carry out research as part of their course, we can assist with that by providing them with some funding. As mentioned with our discussion forum, the annual conference, we really encourage students to come along to that to learn more about animal welfare, and we offer very discounted tickets. So our forum has actually just recently happened. It was in May, so we're looking probably for next May for the next one. So keep an eye out on that if you're interested, and it's a great event. And then we also have quite a lot of educational materials on our website, which are specifically for students. So lots of case studies and things which can be really helpful. So if you're interested, certainly have a look at all of that information on the website. There's also the option to stay in touch with us via our newsletter and our social media. So we're pretty active on LinkedIn, putting out lots of updates on things that we're involved with. So it'd be great to stay in touch if you're keen. Today, with the presentation that Chris is going to give, we will be using Slido, which is a polling platform that you can get involved with. So when the Slido polls pop up on the presentation, you'll see that there's a QR code. And there's also a link there, which is just slido.com. So you can do either, just have your phones ready, and then you'll be able to vote for the questions that are on there. So I think there's about 4 of those in total throughout the presentation. And with any questions that you have, you can also pop them into the Slido Q&A. You'll see that pop up when you scan the QR code. So feel free to put any questions on Slido, or you can just use the chat function in Teams as well, whichever you prefer, and Chris will be able to answer those at the end. So I'll hand over to Chris now to start. Thanks so much, Chris.
Thanks, Alina. A little bit more about me. I spent 30 years in practice. small animal practice, most of it, and then went to work for the RSPCA as their chief vet, and then to work for Dogs Trust as veterinary director there. And puppy farming has been an issue close to my heart. For all of that, I used to see some of the product of these horrible puppy farms when I was in practice, and of course, as a national representative of animal welfare organisations, very involved in discussions at all levels about puppy farming in the future. So perhaps if we go on to the interest slide, Maureen. I'm going to talk a bit today about how we define puppy farming, what the numbers might be, where they are, what the law says about it, the implications for it, and what we might do to improve the situation. So in terms of the definition then, there are two. This first one is quite wordy and quite long. And then there's another one which is rather briefer and I think does pretty much what it says on the tin. So it's breeding without any regard for health or welfare, either of the breeding stock or their puppies, and it applies all the way across the board. Let's do a Slido poll then. Just as a matter of interest, what proportion of puppies do you think could come from a puppy farm? So anything up to 50%. So how much of a problem do you think it is? Anyone else voting? Okay, right, well, let's do some mathematics and see if we can work it out. But the majority there saying over 30%. So first thing we need to do is look at the dog population. And there are two organisations that do polls of the dog population. Of course, there's no national census, so these are done by questionnaires. So there's bound to be a certain amount of variability in there, exactly the same as there is for any other poll. And we won't talk about any of the polling that's going on at the moment. So somewhere between 11 and 12 million dogs a year. It went up quite significantly according to both of those polls over the pandemic, when a lot of people started working from home and thought they could have a puppy. So on average then a puppy will live for somewhere 11 or 12 years, and I know there's huge variation in that. If you have a Great Dane and it gets to 10, you're doing pretty well. If you have a Jack Russell Terrier, one of the old type, mongrelly type Jack Russell Terriers, they very often live to 15 or 17, but 11 to 12 is about average. So if you do simple mathematics on that, you can work out that there roughly have to be a number born every year, which is somewhere around the million mark, just to keep the population static. And that's gone up from about 800,000 post-pandemic, or potentially can go up from 800,000. So very large numbers of puppies. So how do we get at where they come from? Well, the first obvious place is the Kennel Club, and they register about 350,000 registered pedigree dogs a year. And just bear in mind that a registered pedigree dog is not what everybody would call a pedigree dog. There are a lot of pedigree mongrels out there that actually don't have any long-term registration. We know that some are imported. And there are other registers as well. There's a Cockapoo register, for instance, which is another crossbred. So in terms of imports, a few years ago, the Irish dog breeding community reckoned that they sent about 45,000 from the Republic of Ireland to the UK. And of course, with a porous border between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, and effectively in those days, it is pre-Brexit, it was very easy to send dogs from Ireland to the UK. So somewhere in the middle of that, then there are puppy farm dogs, and those dogs that are coming from Ireland will almost all be puppy farmed. The ones that come from Europe, some of them will be puppy farmed, and there is significant breeding in Eastern Europe, Romania, Bulgaria, those sort of countries, producing puppies for sale in Western Europe, not just the UK. And various surveys and full marks to those who said 30% of puppies come from puppy farmers. Most of the survey work tends to think that 30% of puppies are born in those circumstances. So what does it mean being a puppy farm? Where are they? Well, they tend to be in rural areas. So Wales, Scotland, East Anglia are the most common. Where farm barns that are no longer used for farming have been converted to puppy farms. And you'll see later, I've got some pictures. The next one, Marine. Ireland, as I've said, is an obvious source, and there are some enormous, or were some enormous puppy farms in Ireland. I think the worst that I came across was a guy who had a load of scrap cars in a field or fields, and he ripped out everything that was inside, took out all the seats, put a load of straw in the bottom of the car, and each breeding bitch lived in a car like that and had litters in cars like that. And you imagine what the conditions were like for those puppies. And overseas, again, the thought of animal welfare in some of these places versus profit is very low on their radar. So there are a lot of puppies, and it's very easy to stick 30 puppies in the back of a transit van and drive them to the UK without any paperwork. And even if you can get the paperwork, very often the paperwork is forged or inaccurate with things like rabies vaccination dates. There have been a number of well-documented instances where puppies have come to the UK with rabies vaccination certificate showing absolutely no titer for rabies antibodies at all, clearly not vaccinated. And of course, the other thing that is relevant from overseas now is that it is illegal to import a puppy less than 15 weeks old, because they have to be 12 weeks before they can be vaccinated, and they have then to wait 3 weeks before they come to the UK. So 15 weeks is the minimum. Great majority of these puppies are well under 15 weeks, because by the time they're 15 weeks and they've got to the UK, they're much less saleable than a puppy that's come from this country. So what's the law say about this? Well, Basic Animal Welfare, of course, Act. Animal Welfare Law is the Animal Welfare Act for Scotland, for England and Wales. Animal Health and Welfare Scotland Act for Scotland, and the similar act in Northern Ireland. They caught up a bit later. And all of them pretty much say the same things in the basic legislation. And that is about the animal's needs. So the animal's needs are defined more or less the same in all of those laws. There is a little bit of variation, but it's essentially the same. And it's pretty basic. In other words, these animals should be able to live a normal life doing what animals do. So environment, diet, normal behavior, housing, and protection from pain, suffering, injury, and disease. And if you remember the 5 freedoms, this is really an extension of the 5 freedoms. And of course, we've gone on now to the 5 needs, which includes much more about mental health rather than just physical health. So there are other bits of legislation that apply, particularly in England, but there's also some relatively similar legislation in Scotland and in Wales. Next one. And basically, for to be licensed under the animal welfare regulations, there's a business test. So if you're making money out of breeding puppies, you should be licensed. And of course, that's a nonsense because if you have 3 Great Dane puppies and you sell them for £3,000 each, the business test is any sale over £1,000. If you have 3 Great Dane puppies, then you're well into a business. Whereas if you have 1 Chihuahua puppy, you might actually squeeze in under the £1,000. These days, I guess probably not. But there is a more specific definition, and that is there are 3 or more litters in 12 months. And so no matter what the income is, if you have 3 or more litters, you have to have a license. You're only allowed to have 1 litter per bitch per year, and there is a limit on the number of litters in the bitch's lifetime, and also potentially the number of caesareans. So here's a question then again. How many... Oh, let's go. Right, we'll come to that question in a minute. Sorry, I'm not working the slides. For some reason, Teams won't let me work the slides, which is why it's slightly confusing. There, in that legislation, in the regulations, there is a specific section about welfare and health, and it says this that. You can't keep a dog for breeding if it is reasonable to expect that either genetically or on what it looks like or its state of health, that it could have a detrimental effect on the breeding bitch or the health and welfare of its offspring. So if you have a Shar-Pei that is wrinkled from one end to the other, and you breed from that, it is likely to have Shar-Peis that are wrinkled from one end to the other. And that's just one example of all the variety of inherited defects. Interestingly, we're a bit behind the curve here because other European countries have now got much more specific legislation than this, which courts have said that they actually impose a ban on some breeds, typically the Bulldog and the Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, both of whom virtually the entire breed has some sort of inherited defect that will affect both the adults and the puppies. So, go on, next one. So, how many Caesars do you think a bitch should have? Reasonably. So I've got a straw poll on your Slido thing. Well, you'll know if you've been seeing small animal practice up to now, you'll be well aware that some breeds, the majority of puppies are born by caesarean section. Bulldogs, survey result work done on French bulldogs about 4 or 5 years ago showed that 89% of puppies were born by caesarean section. And it's inevitable then that these poor breeding bitches are having repeated caesareans. And if you've ever been there when the caesarean's been done and the second caesarean's been done, you see the amount of scar tissue that you get from the first caesarean, you can understand why multiple caesareans should not be allowed. And of course, there are sadly people who still do them. So vets get involved in inspecting this licensing legislation by providing advice to local authority inspectors. And if you're ever involved in this, you do need to read the guidance and the legislation before you go, because what you're allowed to do is to enforce the legislation as the guidance suggests. What you're not allowed to do is to extend the conditions beyond what the licensing legislation actually says. Go on to the next one, Maureen. So obviously you shouldn't be doing your own clients because you have a conflict of interest. And as I say, you mustn't go any further than the guidance goes. The guidance was written by a very large group of all sorts of people, including commercial breeders and the Kennel Club. And so it's not as precise and not as restrictive as perhaps we might like, but it is at least in the law. And don't forget that it's different between England and Wales and between England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. So what does all that mean? Well, for the breeding stock, a poor environment, to put it mildly. And I've got some pictures now, which I collaborated with a BBC Wales programme where they did some undercover filming, which is why the quality is a bit odd, for a number of puppy farms around Wales. Just go back to that previous one, Maureen. So this is taken from a number of places, and you can see there, first of all, you see straw used as bedding. Straw is not an ideal bedding for any dog, actually. Little bits get in the wrong places, underneath third eyelids, up noses, and all sorts of in ears, of course. But you can also see from this is clearly what was a barn, probably used for cattle. And you can see that there is no insulation in the walls. It's just simply tin between there and the outside world. So that in the summertime, this is going to be stinking hot. And in the wintertime, it's going to be freezing cold. And you can also see that the only sign of any heating on this front right hand pen, you can see that there is some sort of a pig lamp, which is the only heating that there is in the whole of that barn, completely ineffective for most of the animals. So that is hardly a good environment. That's one of the better ones. You can see this one's even got slatted sides on the barns and an open end. And you can imagine in the winter that the snow blows in there, and this is being used to keep adult dogs in and to rear puppies. And if you look at the next one, these are how the puppies are being reared. So again, straw on the ground. That bread crate, I suppose, is supposed to be the bed. If you look at the next one, you can see, get a pretty clear idea of how often these puppies are being cleaned out for the amount of feces on the floor. And you get a good example there of the sort of food that the puppies are being fed. If you've ever had contact with a litter of puppies, I've never known a litter that didn't devour its food as if they were never going to get another meal in their lives. So the fact that the food is still there just shows what a poor diet it is and how unappetizing it is. Let's go on to the next one. So there's all of that, and we talked about the diet. In Wales, breeding animals have to have an annual vet check. And so when you look at those vet checks, there are clear signs of chronic disease. So if you look at this, the next slide, which shows you a result of a vet check. So this is the vet talking about what the animals are like. And you can see, sixth one down, Pansy, the King Charles, has had rotten teeth and tartar removed by the vet with no anaesthetic. And then he's left antibiotic to be injected to try and reduce the infection. Bobby the Bichon Frise, when we looked at these, he was being treated for sarcoptic mange. And when we looked back at the same vet check for the same farm the year before, he was being treated for sarcoptic mange. That's the level of care that these animals are getting. When curing sarcoptic mange these days is easy, isn't it? It's not like the old days where you had to bath them once a week and this, that, and the other. With modern drugs, resolving sarcoptic mange should be easy. And there's no way that one animal should be showing symptoms 2 years running. So chronic disease, they are bred from every season. So a bitch that's a small breed bitch like a King Charles or a Frenchie that's going to come into season every 6 or 9 months will have a litter every 6 or 9 months. And that just shows the level of disregard for the health of the animals. If you've ever seen a breeding bitch when she's at the end of her lactation period, if she's been feeding the puppies properly, they're really pretty skinny by that stage. And of course, then they're something like 16 weeks post-season. So they're going to come into season again in the next 6 or 8 weeks. That doesn't give them time to recover physically or mentally, I suspect. And the incidence of eclampsia, low calcium, is much more common in these sort of bitches. And then, of course, at the end of that, when the bitch comes to the end of her useful breeding life, and that essentially means whenever there's a problem, they'll go on breeding from them as long as they possibly can. And we used to see dogs when I was working for both RSPCA and Dogs Trust, Labradors that have been so overbred that their mammary tissue is almost draping on the ground because they've been in almost continuous lactation for the whole of their lives, really in dreadful states. If the bitch is lucky, they will get handed on to some of the charities that talk to these puppy farmers and will take bitches from them. If they're unlucky, a shotgun is the end point. So they are completely heartless. So just as an example, this again came from this BBC programme that they did. They actually went into a puppy farm posing as a member of the public and said, I don't want a puppy. I really want an adult. Have you got any bitches that you don't need for breeding anymore? And this Welsh puppy farmer cheerfully gave them a bitch. Cavalier King Charles. She was thin. She had a very poor coat, very large mammary tissue. And so they took the bitch on and took her straight to a vet. And this just shows you what she's like. And when I say very enlarged mammary tissue, you can see exactly there what she was like. And when the vet examined her, she was dehydrated, she wouldn't eat, she wouldn't properly stand up, she had a really crouched posture. And when the vet examined her, she got a puppy retained in the vagina. And that had obviously been there for some days. So that just shows you how much regard there is. So what do you think the issues are with the puppies that come from these places? This is one of these word clouds, so just put in a single word or 2 words just to describe what you think are the welfare consequences from all these puppies coming from these puppy farms. Anything you like. Behavior is a good one. Yeah. Health, yes. abuse abuse will come in a variety of disguises, but yes, neglect, abuse. Parvo is a big one. Many of these puppies are sold at 6 or 8 weeks, and many of them are dead within a week because they've got parvo. And parvo is endemic in many of these. And it's interesting you've come up with poor socialization. That and inherited disease, and I think we've got genetic disease in there somewhere. Those two things are, yes, at the bottom, avoidable genetic issues. Those two things are lifelong effects on these puppies. You'll know that socialization period is 3 to 8 weeks or 3 to 12 weeks, something like that. So the great majority of their socialization period, these puppies are kept in a pen with almost no human contact. Food thrown in once a day, cleaned out every few days, no contact with other dogs or any other species, no contact with any domestic appliance like a vacuum cleaner or a washing machine or whatever else. Socialization is a huge issue, and many of these puppies are scared of the world for the rest of their lives. That gives you a bit of an idea. So inherited disease. There is no regard on puppy farms for pre-genetic testing. None of these bitches have hip dysplasia x-rays or elbow x-rays. None of them have their eyes examined. There's no blood testing. You simply acquire what looks like whatever pedigree dog you want to breed, and you breed. About that, my computer went to sleep. It's obviously because I'm not actually doing anything. Yeah, so no inherited disease. You simply buy what looks like the right breed, and you breed from it until you can't do any more. We've talked about parvovirus a bit, but ringworm is common. Sarcoptic mange is common in puppies, as well as the other sort of infectious diseases. Simply stress diarrhea in many of them. They're not treated for worms, and of course that then will exacerbate a stress diarrhea. They're not treated for fleas. They're not treated for anything that you can possibly get away with. Vaccination is an interesting issue because many of these puppies are vaccinated at 6 weeks old simply because parvovirus is endemic, in an attempt to suppress any infection before they can be sold. The vaccination certificates, or actually I say records of vaccination, because they're certainly not signed by a vet. Who knows where the vaccine came from? Did it come from this country? Is it a licensed vaccine, or was it illegally imported? Were the vaccines kept in the fridge? Were they given in proper sterile syringes, etc., etc.? So yes, huge issues about vaccination, and I would not believe any record of vaccination that comes with what I think might be a puppy farm dog. And socialization we've talked about. So you are going to see these puppies coming in to your practice once you're qualified. Just run through this slide, Maureen. So this is what you're going to be faced with. And these very often are quite sensible, responsible people, but they're just desperate to have a puppy. And so you're likely to be presented with puppies that are pretty poorly, and clearly have come from a puppy farm and are going to cause all sorts of problems. And I used to see these in practice. We had a puppy farm down in Somerset, and they bred Westies, of all the things to breed. And we used to see these puppies coming in pot-bellied, diarrhea, and this actually was before parvovirus was even around. So this was entirely lack of proper care before they came to the owner. And I used to say to people, look, this puppy's come from a puppy farm. You are going to have all sorts of problems with it because of the lack of the socialization and proper care up until this point. And I used to say my best advice to you is to take the puppy back and get your money back. And of course, nobody ever did because they'd fallen in love with the puppy by that stage. So nursing both the puppy through these sort of experiences and their owners is something that you might want to have a think about because it's not easy. And of course, people feel very, very guilty for having taken a puppy farm puppy on. And then you have the other sort of people who actually see these puppies in an environment that they think is horrible and buy them because they just want to get the puppy out of there and then regret it later. So all sorts of issues. So how can we get over this? What can we do to help? Well, the first thing is use the puppy contract. It was written by jointly AWF and RSPCA, and it's designed to give a potential owner some comfort that actually the puppy has been properly bred. So there are two parts to it: the puppy information pack, which has all the detail about the puppy and its parents, and the contract for sale, which is simply a legal contract. So it's quite a long document. If you're a competent, thorough breeder, it's easy to complete. If you're a puppy farmer or you're an amateur, it's not. It is supported by legislation, so the regulations, the breeding regulations, say that breeders should use a puppy contract. It doesn't unfortunately specify this puppy contract, which is by far and away the best. So just to show you what it's like, it's quite a long document, and it's got all the detail about both parents, microchip numbers, what inherited disease checks they've had, and all of that sort of stuff, and a whole load of information about what's been done to the puppy when they've been wormed, what socialization they've had, and all the rest of it. So using that, there's never a guarantee in this world, but if you are advising clients about how to look for a good breeder, ask them, suggest that the breeder fills in the puppy contract, because if they're reluctant to do that, the chances are that they're not going to be doing the job properly. So what else can we do? Well, education is paramount in all of this. And for years and years and years, the welfare organisations have been saying to the general public, always see the bitch with the litter, or never buy a puppy that you can do so over the phone or over the internet. Collect it from Sainsbury's car park, and that's a common technique with these. So as veterinary professionals, giving advice to potential puppy owners is really, really important. So that poster that Maureen just showed was a poster produced by DEFRA a couple of years ago to try and encourage potential puppy owners to think about where they get their puppies from. So another survey then, word cloud. What can we do as the veterinary professions to help all of this? Yep, certainly educating clients. That's Readoption advice. Yeah, lovely. Yeah, really good suggestions, all of those. Let's go on to the next one then. I say puppy contract, obviously. Veterinary advice, people seem to be very reluctant to ask for advice before buying a puppy. And I think actually it's one of the jobs that nurses in practice will excel at, talking to people about not just where they might get a puppy, but what breed they might get that's going to suit their lifestyle. And you know, you see so many people who buy a puppy from the wrong place with a breed that doesn't suit their lifestyle at all. If you lived in a fifth floor flat, would you want to have a border collie that wants to be out and about and active and doing things all day, because they don't fit people's lifestyles? So veterinary advice is really critical, and I think the profession has a duty as professionals to provide free advice for people who are thinking of buying a puppy. Because if it's free, people will ask for it. If they think they have to pay for it, they won't. We should improve inspection. One of the downsides of the breeding legislation is that it only applies if you breed more than 3 litters. And of course, as long as there's a threshold like that, the people who are running this as organised crime will ignore that and never ever get themselves licensed. So I think every breeder should be licensed, whether they have 1 litter or 21 litters, so that we have some sort of contact with every breeder. And local authorities who are currently tasked with enforcing this, of course, local authorities have no money, and on their list of things that they need to do, sadly, animal welfare very rarely comes anywhere near the top. So there's a lot that we can do there. So then, just in summary to end, this is low welfare, high volume breeding. That's the definition of puppy farming. And the consequences of it are pretty horrible. There are legal obligations. The Animal Welfare Act applies to all sentient animals all the time. And the consequences of it are really pretty horrible. For the breeding stock, is a life of misery, of being stressed, poorly cared for, improperly treated. And for puppies, very often it's a life sentence. They either die very early from disease that they picked up and brought with them, parvovirus particularly, or they have a life of misery because they're not properly socialized, or they have one inherited defect or another. And so the consequences in welfare terms for this whole system really is pretty shocking. And what we need is more veterinary input, more people shouting about the horrors of puppy farming, and talking to their clients and trying to improve the situation. So that's all I was going to say. I think we've got a closing slide with contacts on. And then you've got my favourite picture of all time, which my 3 animals, sadly now all 3 dead, but mother and daughter curled up on their bed, the 2 retrievers, and Prudence the cat, who thought it would be a nice, comfortable place to sleep. So that's all I have to say. Let's go for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. We've got a few questions in Slido. So One of them is, how possible is it to socialize a puppy outside of its socialization period if it misses that in a puppy farm?
It is possible. It's just much more hard work, and there's always in the back of these puppies' minds the response to fear. It's basically a fear response. Puppies will go and investigate with a much lower fear threshold than an adult dog, and they learn very quickly from that. So the washing machine that's going in the utility room when the puppies are in the kitchen, they'll hear that, they'll investigate, they'll if the people who are rearing them doing properly, they'll get some comfort from the human that it's not a threat, and they'll learn that it's not a threat. Now, if they have to learn that as an adult, it's a much more protracted process. You're going to have to do it much more as a experience reward system to actually get them to learn that. And the problem is that there are so many of these things that are out there that that puppies have to learn about. What's the difference between a man and a woman, an adult and a child, a man with a beard, a woman with a hat? There are a myriad of these things, and it's just not possible to not be afraid of all of them if you've never met them before. So it can be done, but it's jolly hard work.
Right. Another question we've got in Slido is, should a dog owner who breeds their dog as a one-off be classified as a breeder under law? And if so, what criteria should determine this classification?
My answer to that is yes. As I said, as long as you have a threshold for licensing of people, people will always try to hide underneath that threshold, even if they know it's there. So I think every breeder should either be registered or licensed. The law actually has a dual system. So a license implies that somebody comes along and inspects and looks at your premises and the way you're doing things and all the rest of it. It's quite complicated. Registration system simply means that you have to tell somebody that you are going to breed from your bitch, or indeed you have bred from your bitch, because it could be retrospective. And that you will follow the guidance in terms of how you do the breeding, how you do the inherited defects checked, and all the rest of that stuff. But it would also critically give the local authority a right of access to go and inspect that person, even though they've had one litter. So the difference between the two, license, you definitely get inspected. Registration, the local authority know you're there and give you a registration number. And if there is ever an issue, they can go and inspect. The great advantage of all of that, of course, is that you then say, if you advertise a puppy, doesn't matter whether it's on the internet, Gumtree, or any other of these things, or you put a notice in the window of your local post office, you have to put your license number or registration number on it so that you become traceable. And that way, because one of the big problems with puppy farmers is that the puppies are not traceable. That way, there can be some consequence when things go wrong. So the puppy that dies after a week from parvovirus because it's endemic in the puppy farm and lands the client with a bill of £1,000 or whatever else it's going to be, it allows the client then to have some redress against the puppy farmer. And the only way to get at these people is to hurt them in their pockets. Because otherwise they just don't care. And I know HMRC's got a big project been going now for several years to find these breeders. And I think the most I heard was somebody who got a bill for about £400,000 from HMRC for undeclared earnings and fine. £400,000 is a significant amount of money. And so it's a really, really good incentive to make people do the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a question in the chat about the RSPCA, I think. Where are we? Yeah. Yes, they do. The RSPCA has a special operations unit that goes undercover. In fact, you may have seen only last week or the week before there was a big prosecution of dog fighters in East Anglia somewhere. That was all evidence from the RSPCA undercover people, and they do look very closely at these. If they have sufficient information to do a proper investigation, they will do that and have done it on a number of occasions. And I know one puppy farmer who was prosecuted, convicted, banned from keeping animals, and then prosecuted, convicted, and banned from keeping animals a second time for still puppy farming, even though he'd been banned. The good thing about this, of course, is that in the last year or two, the penalty for the Animal Welfare Act has gone up from 6 months in jail and £5,000 to up to 2 years in jail and an unlimited fine. So that makes it more effective.
There's another question on Slido, which is, all these ideas about licensing and registration sound great, but how can the veterinary sector effectively advocate for these measures to become law?
Well, BVA directly advocates for exactly these sort of things and does a good job on it. And of course, the BVA Kennel Club inherited disease schemes lead the screening for inherited disease. But BVA is also a member of a number of other collaborative groups. The obvious one is a group that goes by the abbreviated title of CFSG. That's because its long title is the Canine, Feline and Sector Group of the Animal Health and Welfare Board for England. So calling it CFSG is probably a good move. And that is the body that feeds directly into DEFRA about legislation. And CFSG has done a lot of work on puppy farming, has spent a lot of time telling government that they should register or license every single breeder. CFSG effectively wrote the guidance for the legislation. So CFSG has been very involved, the veterinary profession, both BSAVA and BVA, involved in that group. So it's not that we're not doing anything, it's just that you need a government that listens and has animal welfare as a priority. And one of the oddities in the world is that if you talk to any politician, they'll tell you they get a lot of letters about animal welfare, but they don't actually do anything about it.
Great, thank you. Okay, we've got a few more questions on here. Okay, what should a vet do if they suspect a puppy farmer is bringing puppies into the clinic?
Right, this is a really, really difficult issue, isn't it? The first thing I would do actually is find out whether they're licensed or not. And you can do that very easily by going to the local authority. If you have a reasonable relationship with the person, you could talk to them about what you think they're not doing properly. In other words, you could talk to them about socialization and parasite control and all of that sort of stuff. So it depends what sort of response you get to that approach, because there's nothing wrong in principle with breeding large numbers of puppies. What's wrong with breeding large numbers of puppies is that it's not being done properly. Now, it's not easy to do it properly, but it can be done. And so my approach would be to try and get the puppy farmer to understand that what they're doing is pretty much a disaster area for the puppies and the breeding stock, and that they ought to improve. And you can do that, little bit by little bit by little bit. Talk to them about vaccination, talk to them about routine worming and parasite control, talk to them about food. And if you get a response, then fine, you're improving the situation. If you don't, and you really think this is a puppy farm, then ring the RSPCA and give them details. And that's the way you can get it in then into the special operations unit, and they might then be able to do something about it. In theory, if the place is not licensed, you could report it to the local authority because they're responsible for enforcing the legislation. But unfortunately, in the real world, the likelihood of getting an adequate response from the local authority is fairly low. It actually comes under trading standards. The other thing you can do, of course, is where you see your clients with the results of these puppy farms, where the puppies are not what they should be, whatever way, you can set trading standards on them. Because Sale of Goods Act applies to the sale of puppies as it does to a washing machine or a motor car. So you can actually get to them that way. And third way, I mentioned HMRC. There's a confidential reporting line to HMRC. If you think that they're not declaring this as income, which is very likely, and confidential report to HMRC might get at them that way. So a number of ways to do it. But try and make them better first. Because frankly, if we stopped all puppy farming tomorrow, where would puppies come from? There would still be a demand for puppies. And this is one of the conundrums in all of this. And I've been saying to welfare organisations for a little while now, actually, why don't you do it properly? Why don't you actually set up breeding establishments? Not necessarily pedigrees, but just breeding dogs, doing it properly, show it can be done properly, sell them. So it would have to be a trading enterprise of a charity. And just prove that it can be done properly, that they can be properly socialized, properly inherited defects tested, and all the rest of that. Nobody's taken me up on it yet.
Checking this message that just came through. Yeah, we need to change the mindset of would-be dog keepers. Let's get the rescue centres empty before we advocate breeding.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But it is a sad fact of life. And I know one person who you would think was very, very responsible, upstanding member of the community. They were desperate to have a Bernese mountain dog, and they eventually bought one from a puppy farm, picked it up from Sainsbury's car park. People, I'm sorry, there is a culture these days that I want it and I want it today, and I'm not prepared to wait. And I'm sorry, if you want a nice puppy that's well bred, well socialized, you have to wait. And you have to do a bit of research and a bit of thinking about it before you do it.
Yeah, one of the other questions on Slido was most puppy farm dogs small breeds. So I think you've just answered that with the Bernese mountain dog.
Yeah, not that small.
No.
But Lord knows what its stifles were like, because that's one of the Bernese problems.
Maybe we'll just do another couple of questions which we've got here. One is, ideally, should all dogs be Kennel Club registered?
What are you trying to prove by having dogs Kennel Club registered? All that you're proving is that somebody's said they know who the parents are. It doesn't have any other implication. There is no quality assurance for registration of a dog, a puppy with Kennel Club, other than somebody says they know who the parents are. There is no requirement to have any health screening. There's no requirement to have any inspection of breeding premises. There is for the assured breeder scheme, but that's a very small minority of puppies coming, being registered with the Kennel Club. So Kennel Club registration is not a guarantee of quality. It's simply a guarantee of somebody saying who they know who the parents are.
Great. Well, we've just gone over time, so yeah, we got lots of questions in, which was great. And thank you again, everyone, for attending. And I hope you found it useful. Please get in touch if you'd like to find out more about what we offer, and keep looking at the website and our social media to see the next webinars that are coming up. And a huge thank you to Chris for giving this talk. It was really great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again.
Back out in the sun.
Bye.